by chance we're crossing the same roads all at one time. Even if you say it come in no time to beg out gracefully, one thing I know for sure, there'll be no doubt when you see you are right smack dab in the middle of it. Right smack dab in the middle, we are right smack dab in the middle of it, right on schedule.
The secret truth. Through forgiveness we awaken, transforming information and knowledge into wisdom. And now our co-host, George Butler.
Welcome to The Secret Truth. I'm George Butler. Charlotte Littlefield is off tonight. We've got a really fine guest with us this evening from Bristol, England. Welcome to our program, Tony Gosling. Well, you've been busy over there. I've been reviewing some of your programs on your weekly talk program, and really you've been doing quite a bit.
That's, well, absolutely loads, George. Yeah. I mean, we've had a busy year, I think it's fair to say. Mostly keeping an eye, I suppose, on the banksters and the hands of banks. I mean, are you familiar with this term? I think it was coined by Finian Cunningham, who is an Irish writer who lives in Africa now, but he's quite a regular contributor around the world to websites like Counterpunch. But, I mean, it's becoming clearer and clearer that the Swiss-German banking regulation centre is really, and probably for many decades and even hundreds of years, has been the sort of root of all evil, really. All roads seem to lead to Basel and various other, Bern, and various other kind of Swiss-German cities. And we've been looking at some of the connections between, well, particularly between the Second World War Nazi gold and, the situation we're now dealing with, where we've got criminal elite, criminal banks, which are financing an enormous criminal enterprise in the West, which is based around impoverishing ordinary people, and it's really the mafia are now starting to run things. Whenever a government looks like it might come to power in some part of the world, like Greece, for example, that wants to serve the people, it's rap on the knuckles with pounds of bank.
Right, it resembles to me Spectre, in 007 books. I mean, it has that international cartel. What do you think?
Ian Fleming, of course, who invented Spectre, was himself in naval intelligence, and he spent much of the post-war period writing stories about what he knew. The only thing is he wasn't allowed to write facts, because otherwise he'd be arrested under the Official Secrets Act. And so he turned much of what he knew into some fantastic novels. Things like Goldfinger, Dr. No, all this kind of, You Only Live Twice, this sort of stuff. And a lot of it was woven into there. And the other thing is that one of the more recent ones of the films that were made, I'm not sure when the book was, but on His Majesty's Secret Service also he goes so far as to look at terminated technology and the use of genetic engineering. So it was clear that Fleming was a conduit for the criminal elite's information. One sort or another, he was doing his best to get it out to the general public, and he wasn't the only one.
Right. So he really put out through fiction a lot of very realistic stories. He fictionalized them because otherwise he'd be in violation of the Secret Act, right? Yeah.
What he was doing, he was putting clues in there in the titles, like even the use of the name James Bond, and also the sorts of plots that were involved and the places they were centred. Like I was talking about Switzerland, isn't it funny, isn't it, in a way? If you've got Britain and Switzerland have got not Britain, England and Switzerland, we've got the red cross on a white background in England and the opposite.
Right.
So there's a sort of,
almost like a joke. In joke, it is, isn't it?
The two countries being the two countries being very interdependent. Now, we've also got the governor of the Bank of England, Marconi now. Marconi is from where? Well, everyone says he's from Canada, but he's not. He's actually from Switzerland. He's one of the main banking regulators from the Bank for International Settlements. In fact, he chaired one of the most important committees in the world on banking regulation at the most important bank in the world, the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank.
And that would be the Financial Stability Board, right? That he chaired there. Yeah.
That's right. But he's now the governor of the Bank of England. So you can see where we're going here. You know, you've got your Federal Reserve locked down in the United States and the Bank of England locked down by these people still. So, you know, there's a lot of, you know, not what would the sort of post 9/11 world, our great introduction to the 21st century. We're living in a world now where it's more, every time, I mean, someone that's worked in journalism, really in an international setting in London, and a professional setting, it's quite easy for people like me, and I'm sure there's lots of others out there, to see the way that we're starting to get a very sophisticated and pretty noxious form of propaganda being churned out. So not only have we got these kind of dumbed down programming, so the idea is really to sort of treat people like the children, talk down to them all the time, and we've also got on the news a kind of theatre where you've got, you know, the whole of Brussels locked down for the best part of a week with all the schools closed, etc., but no real reasons given as to why this is happening, or certainly no evidence produced that the threat is real. And then we've had over the new year as well the similar kind of thing going on in Germany. So it's starting to look very much like a kind of terror theatre narrative rather than any kind of, you know, critical journalism, because the journalists simply are not asking questions. They just believe, it seems, everything that the police, security services tell them, and they're not asking questions. It's almost like the only kind of journalists which are being employed nowadays are the ones that don't ask questions. And it's, I mean, particularly Germany, I find a bit worrying when I see the German public behaving, you know, sort of obediently to I don't think the French are quite the same, to these kinds of public pronouncements about terrorist threats and everyone stays at home. It's almost like a kind of voluntary curfew, George, that people are saying, well, that's great, that's fine, even though no evidence has been produced, we'll just go on to lockdown. Of course, you didn't get the same kind of thing in Paris. You certainly get the same sort of thing from the French. The French are much more, and they're actually much more likely to just kind of ignore the curfew and break it, you know, whatever the risk might be.
The people, when they do the lockdown, they haven't put their hands on their heads, and it's almost like they're arresting them, you know, and treating them like prisoners. You know, some of the evacuees from these so-called terrorist events. They've been doing that in America. See, they walk them out of the schools wherever the shooting has occurred with their hands on their head and, you know, single file. And I mean, they're treating them almost like prisoners instead of possible victims.
Well, I think, you know, slowly but surely democracy is being strangled in Europe. I think it's fair to say that there's quite a lot of, not much politicians, but quite a lot of people actually in the police and security forces who are against this, and, you know, and also some journalists too who are not into this. But slowly but surely, those little pockets of resistance are being one by one taken out, down by one, and it's a kind of piecemeal affair. So it's not easy to see the way that the press is slowly being coerced into a totalitarian type of a system. You know, we always have to just remind ourselves whereabouts the source of a lot of the problems are, and that is we've got this private clubs running our foreign policy, basically. I mean, the Foreign Office is a wholly owned subsidiary of the big business community, who have decided that they want to use foreign policy for war and profit, and whether it's taking, stealing territory and resources. And in Britain, we've got something called Chatham House, which is the Royal Institute for International Affairs. In the US, you've got the Council on Foreign Relations, which basically do this job. They're massively funded, including here in Britain, mostly irritatingly by the BBC, you know, which is publicly funded. Their money goes to the Council, not the Council on Foreign Relations, to Chatham House too. And so that is where the foreign policy is decided, developed, etc. And these are pernicious institutions, private institutions that just simply make decisions about which country is going to be attacked, where, why, and they make the arguments, whatever. It doesn't matter what the argument is that they make to the public through the politicians and through the Foreign Office. That the story's going to be the same. Basically, we're going to do this for grabbing resources. Mostly, it's oil and gas. Of course, we're now at the stage, and I don't think we've really, you and I had a really good discussion about Syria, George. But quite obviously, what they're going for there is the Genie Oil's claim on the Golan Heights and the vast amounts of gas. Which the Syrians have got access to, at least they should have access to. And that's one of the main drivers in this. But there is a much bigger, longer game, which has been going on for centuries, which is the crusade, the idea to take over Jerusalem and use that as a kind of place to build a kind of empire. This is the same kind of crazy dream that the Templar, Knights Templar Crusaders had, that satanic cult that was operating as a big trading organisation back in medieval times. And I don't know if you ever come across this. Over the last few days, George, I've come across this amazing hoax from medieval times called the Prester John hoax. Do you know about that?
Haven't read it.
Well, here, look, your show is just at 3 minutes, so let's have a go at Prester John. Because you see, Prester John was almost a kind of medieval 9/11, and it was perpetrated through the Vatican. In order to convince many people, educated people right across the European continent, nobles mostly, that the Crusades were really well worth doing. And what it was it purported to be a letter which the Vatican had received from a Christian king, and they weren't quite sure where he was, but he was probably somewhere either in India or in Africa, and possibly even in South America. Because, of course, these continents hadn't really been explored in medieval times. But anyway, he was saying, look, the Muslim hordes are attacking us, and we need your help, basically. Now, the amazing thing about this letter is that it carried, it was 11-something or other when it was first revealed, supposedly revealed anyway by the Vatican. And then it was people up to the days of Francis Drake in the 1500s were still believing in this letter. And part of his quest for El Dorado was due to this hoax that had been perpetrated hundreds of years before. So there were people charging off to the Middle East saying, we've got to go and help this Christian king, who's having all this trouble with the Muslims. And yet the whole thing was complete and utter nonsense. But it kept some of the best brains in Europe engaged, and it kept them risking their lives even to try and get across the seas to help Prester John for centuries. So this is the sort of amazing thing that I think what we're dealing with the 9/11 hoax. Well, obviously it's not a hoax that it happened, but it's the storyline behind it.
I call it a myth. The 9/11 myth. It's a mythology now. It's becoming used like that.
Well, exactly. That's what Prester John was. Right. A myth. He said he ruled the three Indias. Right. This is what was. He was saying, I am a ruler in the three Indias. That I have got 72 kings under me. It's a bit like the whole Hitler thing of the biggest lie is the one that people are most likely to believe, because it was a detailed load of total nonsense. And that's why people fell for it, because they thought, this come through the Vatican, this must be true, So it had people going on these ridiculous expeditions. But the main reason for it was to give the nobles a reason to say, well, look, this guy needs our help. We've really got to go to the Holy Land and we've got to fight the Muslims to help him. And that was a very successful hoax that lasted for hundreds of years. And I would suggest you listen, or just sort of look up Prester John, and it's also interesting to see the way that he changed over the centuries. Where he was. The Vatican saying, "Oh no, you think he's in South America? Now we're going to have to go over and help him in South America."
Oh, gosh. Now getting back to this, that's interesting. Getting back to this Genie oil, there's an oil play right now in the Golan Heights. Right there. And who's behind that but Dick Cheney and Jacob Rothschild and James Woolsey, Larry Summers and Rupert Murdoch and so forth. by gosh, that what's going? And also, there's an oil play off the coast of Israel, and then there's one that's been stopped off the coast of Gaza by another group, oil group. I understand. So it's about oil and money, isn't it? Part of this.
Yeah, I mean, the person I've been following on this, I think has been giving the most reliable analysis and information is William George. I think partly because he's right. I think he's originally German. I'm not sure. Is he a German academic, or although he's an American German or something like that? He seems to have a very good relationship with the Russians and the Germans, so he's getting some of the best intelligence from both sides there. And of course, he's very concerned about the way that Germany and Russia have been divided. So he's sitting on a sort of fascinating line, and he's seeing both sides of it in the native languages. So I think that's why I think William Engdahl's a particularly interesting person to look at the moment, and to follow on Twitter or wherever. You know, you keep an eye on these people, because of course they're never going to be. You know, it really annoys me, George, the way that someone who's such a brilliant analyst as him is just, you know, basically taboo on any of our media. Because if he was sitting in a studio, he would walk all over some of the idiots that they have on, you know, the sort of dumbed down discussion programs. But I mean, yeah, the other thing is, I don't know if you've heard this recently, but several commentators saying that perhaps Syria is the modern Stalingrad. In other words, thus far and no further. You're not going to take Damascus. You're going to go wherever you might want to go, but you're not having Damascus because, of course, of the strategic importance to the Russians. They simply cannot afford to lose influence there. You know, I think is it Tartus the port. You know, you've got also the whole situation with the Bosphorus and the Black Sea. If the Russians lose influence there, that means effectively that the Middle East has fallen to the US and British NATO empire, and that means that really there's going to be a kind of hegemony. There's going to be even more persecution of states down there, and possibly Iran will fall too. And so it's no one really wants it to be the straw that breaks the camel's back in Syria. And even though I can remember 3 years ago seeing on Channel News, any day now, the Damascus regime, Assad and topple, no, sorry, I don't know. And there's also an awakening, I think, amongst military people here in Britain. Interesting to see some comments where they're saying, well, look, this is an unwinnable war. What the hell are we doing? You know, let's not commit ourselves any further. Even though the Houses of Parliament, of course, have been bamboozled over the last few weeks into agreeing to get the RAF bombing in Syria, nobody seems to mention the fact that this, of course, is exactly what the Islamic State, ISIS, want. In order to help their recruitment, because having a few problems.
You know, Brzezinski is saying that to retaliate against Russia if they continue to take out the Syrian rebel assets. 2 months ago, he's saying that. I mean, it's dangerous over there. Yeah, I mean, it looks like that they're pouring in everyone that they can get in there to elevate this to an international UN type of solution. That's what I see they're doing.
Well, look. I mean, nobody seems to be saying it on the nightly news, but in a way, Britain and the US and NATO are now at war with Russia in Syria because both of them are engaged. Because they're talking about the war taking place in Syria, but actually the war is for Syria, not in Syria, for Syria. And that's a crucial difference, and it's not being explained, and it's quite clear now. The Russians are saying, well, look. If you want to fight, we can have a fight, and we believe we will win that fight. And I think they may be right. I mean, I think this is where we're at now. Now the United Nations has been subverted, George. Ever since 1967. I think it is, isn't it? Wasn't that when the Golan Heights were taken?
That was then. In fact, the Israelis attacked there first, I believe, and started the war there, I believe. Yeah, they did. It's proven now that the Israelis...
so that whole inability to deal with the Israeli 67 war and the territory that was taken then, I think it's pretty. You could pretty much point to 1967. You know, the height of the Summer of Love and all that kind of
thing. Yeah, and the West Coast.
Great fun.
You know about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and in London
right.
too, the same exact thing was going on down the King's Road. Everyone was actually full employment. We had here in Britain, very good situation with housing. Pretty much everyone had a decent home. In the 60s, actually probably was the 70s before that happened fully, but I mean, it was good. The pay was good. You didn't have to have a husband and wife going to work. Only one needed to go to work. You could pay the rent very easily, and you had electricity bills and whatever, and have a good amount of leisure time. Certainly, decent holiday time. There was no kind of real social pressure in that way, and a decent amount of money to sort of disposable income people had. They could make savings if they wanted to. So you had a kind of feel-good factor on the home front, whereas 1967, 68, and of course through to the 73, the October War, the Yom Kippur War, which happened afterwards, through that period, funnily enough, everything was going fine and dandy back at home, and people weren't really concerned about foreign policy. Oh, if there's a war going on, never mind about it. But that was when the rot was really setting in the international system, and the United Nations was starting to be strong-armed, mainly by the US veto, of course, and it's also worth remembering the US was the first country to recognize the state of Israel, very much against the wishes of the English, although you could argue the English had a bigger role in creating the state, with the Balfour Declaration than anybody else. And these three basket case states, Israel, United States, and Britain, have created the great poisoning child in the Middle East. And again, we're going back to the Middle Ages, aren't we? We're going back to Prester John and his crazy crusade in order to set up a kind of Western influence takeover of the heart of the three main monastic faiths. I mean, that seems to me a large part. It's not just about oil, George. It's also about a takeover of the physical space of the origin of the main faith of planet Earth.
The 67 war was only 4 years after the JFK assassination. See, so what happened in this country was they had consolidated a lot of this power together from the JFK on, see.
Well, there was also the USS Liberty incident, of course, which I understand your great rock star Jim Morrison and the Doors, his father was involved in that. I don't know if you picked up on that.
I didn't. I was out of the ASA out of Germany about a year before that. Okay, but we had people in Asmara, Africa, listening to all of the conversations on both sides, even the Hebrew controllers of the aircraft, the Israelis, and there's a complete record now that NSA has on what happened there.
Yeah, because, I'm still kind of the building. Funnily enough, the BBC banned them last year. They're allowed to play them on the, it's something to do with copyright, some rubbish they make up, But they don't play them. They probably won't play Jefferson Airplane as well, all the great stuff that was coming out in the late 60s. But I mean, the inspirational stuff. And that father was an admiral in the US Navy, who was involved particularly in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. But he was also one of the top bods in the Sixth Fleet at the time of the Six-Day War, the Six Day, and it was him, allegedly. I mean, I can't absolutely give you the 100% one, but there's an article which was in the Daily Telegraph from one of the Daily Telegraph blogs, where someone was citing him, George Morrison, I think his name was, as being the admiral that launched the retaliation to the attack on the USS Liberty. And George Morrison, from then on, was a centre of kind of anti-Israeli feeling within the US military. And many people are speculating now more and more, of course, as events develop, that his son was murdered because Jim Morrison in Paris, because of his father's anti-Israel feelings within the American military. But of course, Lyndon Johnson and the White House pulled back the attack because it was a retaliation.
That's a fact. That LBJ did call those fighters back.
And the other interesting thing is that Admiral Morrison, Jim Morrison's very smart dad, instantly said, well, we've got to have an immediate economic attack on the Israelis, so in other words, basically stopping their money. straight away, and letting the Israeli president know, right, literally as soon as that attack had happened, like that same day, the Israelis weren't getting any money.
Yeah.
So that was Admiral Morrison's dealing with the situation. But of course, nowadays we're dealing with an expanding Israeli state, a very powerful presence abroad in intelligence gathering, and also in all sorts of dirty tricks. So it's quite clear that the Israelis were involved in the September 11th attacks as well, and in creating this sort of impetus in the United States, almost like a kind of cattle prod reaction, electric shock reaction to, right, we've got to do something now. Well, if you set off in the wrong direction, who wants to admit that we're now going for the wrong enemy? Nobody really wants to admit that.
Right, exactly.
And of course they are going for the wrong enemy.
I mean, this thing, we've discussed Gladio several years ago, and now we're having all of these shootings, and some of these in America are hoaxes. But the American public does not have enough snap to catch on to some of this stuff, I'm afraid.
Well, I can tell you what, I don't necessarily agree with you there, George, because I think a lot of the young people are very much more switched on. I don't know what the situation is in the US, but certainly here in Britain. I mean, youngsters, I'm talking about really, when I say youngsters, I mean, I'm an old boy now, I'm 50, but, 30 years down, 30 years, people in their 20s, people who have been brought up really since the 1990s on using internet from time to time. They just do not rely on the mainstream news at all anymore. I mean, we had a hilarious thing here. Well, I say hilarious, it's sad. But the stories change from day to day, and nobody is supposed to notice on the TV news. We had a massive flood up north in England, in York, just a few days ago, with the rivers flooding. And then one day they said, oh, well, we lifted the flood barrier because to protect our electrical pumps and things like that. And then the next day they said, oh, well, the electrical pumps were flooded, so we had to lift. So what they're doing is they're just changing the story. They're making things up. They're lying to the faces of the journalists and the public. And I think for many young people, they look at this and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. They're obviously lying. So the propaganda is starting to fall apart. And the youngsters, I mean, older people who are used to trusting the news from time to time, probably do. But most youngsters just don't, George. And there's a very, very strong kind of questioning conspiracy culture amongst the young people.
Well, what I meant to describe was that middle age group, probably. See, they're not that tech oriented. They're still hooked into television and the mainline media. See. Yeah.
Well, look, the main thing is the psychological warfare side of things, which is that people just want to be reassured and patted and told everything is fine. When of course it isn't. We're moving to a situation here in the UK where more and more things which the earth provides for free, things like water and which are really marginal services. When you think that how much it actually costs to put a water pipe in and pump loads and loads of water gushing out of the ground along that pipe, you're starting to get the prices of all these things jacked up. When people are thinking, well, hang on, isn't that free? Can we have the ground for nothing? And how come we're now paying all this amount of money for it? And we're getting more and more of this, of course. Prices being jacked up. And so what they're doing is they're also moving more and more towards this kind of microchip system for buying and selling things. And we're going to a kind of biblical revelation style mark of the beast, it seems to me. If you get every credit card you get now, and of course more and more money. Finland is almost completely going cash free. But here, every time you're using money, you're using this little RFID chip to buy and sell your money, or to make the transactions, the electronic transactions. Now, there's more people, I think, more and more people realizing, well, hang on a minute, this, my ability to spend money that I've got in the bank. First of all, the banks are all crooked.
Yes.
We know that. Everybody can see that they're crooked. And they could just switch me off just like that. And I've got nothing. So they can do this, and they can track everything that you're buying and selling. So the banks are all powerful. They're kind of the new feudal dukes. So you've got the most important, powerful people, and often it seems to me that it's the deistic, Masonic, atheist people who are attracted to these powerful earthly roles I don't know what you think, George, but it's people who don't believe in God that feel this kind of insecurity and that they want to have power. They are absolutely...
Tony, you hit the nail on the head. America is a factory through its colleges and universities of a bunch of secular humanists that are non-believers in God. And they just manufacture them out of these colleges and universities. And I think Francis Schaeffer coined that term, secular humanist. But they're non-believers, and they're manufacturing them like widgets right out of these colleges and universities. I mean, it's production, you know. I saw about 300 graduates or more from a local college here in Texas, Central Texas, and in an hour and 20 minutes they graduated over 300 students, and it was like manufacturing process precision. You know what I mean?
Well, you know what? They're hardwired with a value system, and that value system is a very, very simple one. It's called the dollar. And they make their decisions about what they do with their lives based on the dollar.
It's a system of mammon, see? It's a religion. Mammonism.
This is the crazy thing.
Mammonism is what I've identified it as. It's a new religion, see? And it's a pecking order of money, but what it does, it reinforces the false self, see? See what I mean? And we're just got a bunch of false selves talking to each other, and it's mind-boggling and controlling.
Well, I mean, it's a way of, I think, sucking the soul out.
It is.
And all these kind of. I mean, look, let's just have a think for a minute. If you look up into the sky and you see the sun and the moon in the sky, and you look at maybe get your astronomy book out and you see, well, hang on a minute, the moon is, what is it, 250,000 miles away, I think, the moon. And the sun is 93 million miles away. So there's quite a big difference there, whatever it is, 300-400 times far further away the sun is than the moon. So why are they the same size in the sky? Why are they the same size? Does this not suggest to you that there's some kind of design here? I mean, it's not as if there's 10 different moons or 10 different suns to look at. There's only two. Yeah, one moon and one sun. So you're being told there, anybody that has the brains to look and see and understand that this has been set in place. So at the very least, we're looking at intelligent design, George. We're looking, we must be. There's no other explanation for that. It would be a wildly crazy coincidence for life to just start anyway, from nowhere. Of course, it can't do that. It doesn't. Entropy, the laws of entropy mean that simply cannot happen. Anyone that studied physics will know that things fall apart. They do not construct themselves out of nothing. So just looking up into the sky and seeing a moon and seeing a sun and understanding that they're both the same size should tell anybody that there's something going on here. It's not just what we're being told, which is the secular humanist evolution style world. Now, where you go from there is up to you, but there are some basic things which are just built into the world we live in, including actually, I think it's fair to say, some of the beauty of the design of the world we're living in, that should tell anybody that this is total bunkum, all this secular humanist world that we're being taught now in our schools and colleges is the real thing.
They have to maintain and construct something that is conducive to introverted, not objectivism, but subjective, see? And that's what the secular humanist production is it creates a very subjective person who can be controlled by outside stimulation and news, see? Because truth is relative to them. That's it. See?
Yeah, well, this is the problem, is that people are not being brought up with a critical faculty as much as they used to be. I mean, certainly here. I mean, we used to be,
the trivium schooling.
School, where we're talking about in the 1960s, we were brought up very much with, I went to a grammar school, and we were brought up very much with a kind of critical faculty, ask questions. I remember my physics teacher, bless him, Mr. Black, a Jewish man, was one of the best teachers I ever had, well, probably the best teacher. And the first thing he ever said to us was, if a scientist ever tells you that they know a fact, they're lying. Science is about theory, and it's always going to be about theory. It's about testing things and seeing what might be going on.
Exactly.
You cannot, as a scientist, ever be sure about anything. And also, he said, you went through a whole load of historical scientists who were brilliant and, geniuses in their own way. But then their theories had been found to be not necessarily flawed, but then other people have built more theory on top of their theory.
Right.
So you're only ever going to get part of the way to understanding through science. And what's happened is we've been being taught and drilled into us that science is the be-all and end-all, that you can work anything out through science. And, of course, you can't. It's all going to be theory.
Right. That's where they have everybody so mixed up. Now, one of the points you made earlier about these younger people is that I think they understand that they can learn from the Internet, and there are some good sources like you and others on the Internet where people can come in and listen to someone that makes sense, And I think they're catching on.
Well, the internet has now, taken the role of what used to be a good, responsible media.
Exactly.
We have one, I think it's fair to say, in Britain up until the 1980s, roughly. We had around about the same time as the demise of the United Nations, the 60s and 70s was a big change. And there was I think post-war, an understanding that newspapers had to be balanced. There was a professional union of journalists, which I'm still a member of, and the journalists' union were pretty strict, really, about saying that articles had to be balanced, that you'd have to have both sides of the more extreme sides of a debate included. That was true for television too, where you had opposing points of view rather than 3 or 4 points of view from the same side, like whatever it is, pro-bombing Syria. We had a hideous thing here on BBC Radio 4 recently, with 3 people talking about the VIP pedophile scandal, all of whom were one way or another implicated with propping up the defence against the potential VIP pedophiles. So it wasn't a debate at all. It was just really a little kind of talking shop amongst people, some of whom might actually have been paedophiles themselves. So that's the sort of thing which is now being presented as a kind of debate, and it does seem as if that whole use of our media for propaganda purposes is starting to get past its sell-by.
Yes, I think it's becoming too transparently wrong and evil and blatantly propaganda versus
well, of course, the other thing that's coming up to its sell-by date is our economy. The economy is also coming up to its sell-by date. I'm looking at the figures here in the UK, where the Chancellor, George Osborne, is completely failing to do anything about the economy with austerity, and more economists are starting to say, well, hang on a minute, this is just not working, is it, George? Right. And, of course, we knew that from day one. It's just a question of really the media providing cover for George Osborne. And I'm starting to look at our elections now as a kind of really just a way of getting in a new face that's going to be telling us how things are on the television. It's almost like the politics behind it don't matter, and the only thing that really matters is who is going to be listened to by the TV news and whose views are going to be espoused. It is a kind of technocracy we're moving towards, where those people in charge of the transmitters, the media, the mass media anyway, where several million people a night might be watching or listening. Right. They are the ones who are directing consciousness. I remember, I don't know if you followed this brilliant American, well, he was actually originally Peruvian filmmaker, Alan Frankovich. Have you come across him, George?
Sure, no.
Well, he was born in Peru, and of course he was surrounded by the U.S. style imperialist stuff that was going on in South America in his upbringing. I was just talking about Alan Frankovich when we got knocked off, I'm afraid. There was a little break in the communication on the mention of the great filmmaker's name. He was born to Peruvian parents. I think it was a mining family. His father was in Peru. And he then went up and studied at LA Film School, the university there. Okay. And then he did a terrific film, a really brilliant film, which is called On Company Business. It's actually a 3-part film. I think each one is a little over an hour. Really looking into the activities of the CIA. And he did this in the 1970s, I think. He said it took him 5 years, and he went all around the world researching film in all different film libraries. And then he went on to do a film called On Company. So that was On Company Business, was the first one. I think it's called Inside the CIA, something like that, which really exposed U.S. foreign policy, mostly in Latin America and in Africa. But he was the thing he did is he actually was getting the individual CIA people, the operatives, the CIA officers, to be speaking themselves. So it's not as if you're talking to people about what they think the CIA are up to. It was actually the main CIA people talking themselves. It was an extremely authoritative film, and it really blew the whole lid off the CIA in many ways. And nobody else was making stuff like this. It was all supposed to be secret. And in a way, he was playing on vanity of some of these people, that they liked the idea that they might be on a film, you know. And they also the compartmentalization, the secrecy. So they hadn't even been told, look, you're not allowed to speak to the press. A lot of what he explained through that film was the way that the intelligence services spend a lot of time manipulating the press, planting stories in the press, controlling the way we see a situation, think about a situation. So if you can do that, then you're a very long way to winning over people to your view of that situation. And of course, this has happened a lot in the past, you know, in things like the war between the Spanish and the English. You know, of course, the Spanish were made to think the English were terrible, and the other way around, of course, same with the Germans and the British. You know, so this has been done throughout history, but it's still going on now. And I think, in a way, it's a lesser extent because of people like Frankovich being on one side. And this is one of the things I try and do, and I know you do, George, is to be very critical about our own side. This is what the Stop the War Coalition in London does. And they were criticised recently. There was a lot of criticism from the War Party, the warmongers, and their various agents, MPs, many of them, saying, well, look, you know, why aren't you protesting about Assad? And why aren't you protesting about Putin bombing Syria? And, of course, this is just a totally ridiculous, silly, spurious argument, because the whole point of Stop the War in Britain is that we're trying to stop the British government, and we're lobbying and campaigning for the British government to stop bombing Syria. And our role is not to interfere in other countries, because we're a self-critical eye, you know, that is one of the most, I mean, I think it's true to say in life as well, you know, it's important to be self-critical as an individual as well as a nation.
This whole Syrian thing is totally in violation of international law. Syria was not an aggressive nation against any surrounding country there.
Well, they will argue that the UN resolution, I can't remember the number of it now, I'm afraid, but the UN resolution on Syria did argue for, they say it argued for by any means necessary, but it doesn't invoke Chapter 7 in the UN Charter, which is it's only by invoking UN Chapter 7 that you're allowed to intervene in a foreign country, and this resolution didn't do that, so therefore it's illegal under international law. Any international lawyer would tell you, but our press is not listening to them. What they're doing, again, is they're only taking the one point of view, one-sided view. You know, again, it's coming down to the press, and I would argue again, the press is key in all this. The media is key in it. I don't know if you followed the death of Licio Gelli. Did you, George?
No, I didn't.
Before Christmas? Well, because he was the Grand Master of P2 Lodge.
Oh, yes.
Just before Christmas.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now.
Well, I was interviewing a contact of mine, Charlie Holmes,
sure,
who lives in that part in Tuscany, you know, about all this. And Charlie came out with some absolute gems, one of which I had no idea of, is that guess which industry the Grand Master of worshipful Grand Master, I think you've got to call him something very like super high worshipful Grand Master or something, of the Grand Orient in Italy. Guess which industry he works in? He's a newspaper man.
I got you.
The press is absolutely at the top of this.
Right.
You know, and they really are key. And the bad guys have always wanted to control the press more than anything. Even if you go back to the original Illuminati writings, well, you know, no one's saying that they're still the Illuminati is still what we're dealing with today. I think it's, you know, probably something different. But this was a very powerful secret society back in the late 1700s. Right. And that one of their key things was we've got to control the press, and that was one of the things they went for. They just simply used money from their rich patrons to take over and bully out anybody that wasn't saying the things they wanted them to say in the press. Now, of course, today that would include things like television, transmission, the communication, the internet service providers, this kind of thing, you know, all the big, you know, Viacom and all these massive media corporations. Those are the ones that the criminal elite want to take over. And whether they're Illuminati or not is absolutely irrelevant. The fact of the matter is they're criminals and they don't want to be subject to the law. That's really what sets them apart from the rest of us, is that the rest of us really actually do want to be part of a society which has got a few rules. They don't. They see themselves above that. And in fact, I think it's fair to say many of them, as part of their arrogant atheism, actually see themselves as gods. They see, well...
Yes,
you know,
they do. They view themselves as God-men. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, at least that's the way I see the mentality of what we're dealing with here. And it's when the rules start, you know, being broken down. The other interesting thing about all of this is that you've got this weird kind of association between the right, which is, I mean, we've got really a far-right government here in Britain, which is taking money away from the basic amounts of money away from people who've got nothing here in Britain, like disabled people and people like that. You know, they're finding that you know, the suicide rate has gone through the roof. The homelessness since Cameron came to power has doubled. I mean, we're talking about rough sleepers sleeping rough in the streets in Britain, as well as people who are very badly housed. So we've got an enormous problem there.
Right.
That's been brought about by this kind of far right. But you see, the weird thing is that they always go around, just like they did in the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War, you know, waving this Christian flag around, saying, "Oh, we're Christians, and why aren't you Christians?" Pointing at the left. So there's this weird dichotomy set up where you're rather concerned and worried that actually what's going on is completely opposite of the reality, that the people on the left who are trying to argue that there should be minimum standards below which no citizen should be allowed to fall, that is, you know, whether they're elderly, they're poor, they're a single mother, they're, you know, in any sort of difficult situation where they haven't got an income, that they need state support. That, to me, is a much more Christian attitude than those that say, well, look, you know, basically it's the law of the jungle. Now, that is not Christian, and that's effectively what's being instituted here in Britain. And we've had, before Christmas, and actually during New Year, we've had David Cameron, the Prime Minister, talking about Christian values, and saying how important it is that Britain is still a Christian country, and yet doing the total opposite, causing mass homelessness and taking the money away, state aid away from the people that most need it.
I know, it's never ending. And then, I mean, well, you know what it gets back to, though, what I always say is that these are men primarily, aren't they not, in leadership and in power positions? And that,
well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
We had Margaret Thatcher as
well, there's a few women around, you know, here and there, but with the male ego is a major problem in this whole scheme of things, and the delusion is very grand and very deeply seated in these ego states.
Yeah, I think basically, you know, it's a gangster mentality that we're dealing with, and we're also obviously dealing with mass blackmail going on of politicians. If you look at the VIP scandal, that's pretty clear. That's the motive behind it all.
Right.
Is that to blacken up, to find people who've got a proclivity towards sort of sexual perversion of one sort or another, then to get evidence on them that they've been doing things with kids,
right,
and then allowing them, unbeknownst to them maybe sometimes, to push them into key power positions in the civil service and in the government, maybe in the military too as well. And then to use that information to simply blackmail them. Now, this is a very old trick.
Right.
And it goes back quite a long way of criminal fraternities, criminal elites. Probably also worth reminding ourselves about the involvement of Freemasonry in a lot of this, because one of the things that's come out through the VIP file scandal and through the hacking scandal at Scotland Yard is that the most difficult webs of criminality in Scotland Yard, I mean, we're talking about where detectives have been turning up on a Monday morning to find that a year's worth, or 2 years even, worth of investigations that they've been doing, a long, you know, slow investigation, is simply been deleted from the computer system.
Oh, my God.
And they've got no records left of the 2 years' work. It's quite obvious that organised crime is deeply into Scotland Yard, that the most difficult criminal rings within Scotland Yard to root out have been Freemasonry ones of Masonic origin. And that's been admitted, I think it's called Project Riverside, in Scotland Yard's own reports. Of course, this is hardly reported at all by your Masonic press. You know, at least some of them are.
Well, England's run by the Masons. That's it. They run it. They
and also, of course, Italy was brought together as a country by Freemasons.
That's right.
And the thing Italy that Charlie was explaining to us, you know, the Freemasonry in Italy was very big, and now it's in different nature in the United States and Britain. You've got the Scottish Rite and the York Rite, and they are ostensibly Christian, and they have been for hundreds of years. But what you're seeing now is they're reverting to type to this atheistic Grandorient style deism. I mean, it's a deistic faith. That is to say, you're supposed to believe in God, but really it's atheistic. So they're telling you you've got to believe in God to join, but actually it's an atheistic at the apex of it. It's an atheistic organisation. So that gives you a bit of an idea of just how hypocritical it is right from the word go, and what the whole thing is basically a kind of pyramid selling scheme, you know, that you're being sucked into something. You've got no idea about what you're getting sucked into. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons I think Freemasonry is really, you know, is going to be, in years to come, looked back on as one of the big problems that's caused. I mean, one of the other things Charlie was saying is the way that Freemasonry very much targets public office, to make sure that all the people in certain, in certain public offices are all Masons, not necessarily all in the same lodge, but that they are all able to just take orders and take phone calls from the boss of the lodge. I mean, when we visited the Masonic temples in Bristol, because of course Bristol's it's got a whole sort of Knights Templar chapter, it being an ex-Templar port, which discovered America, I believe, a few years ago. Got to anyway with John Cabot and that lot.
Yeah, John Cabot, yeah.
So if you go in there, you'll find that the great and the good of the city are being ordered around by people you've never met. You know, this is the way that the Freemasonry works.
Right.
And actually Bristol, where I'm actually talking to you from Gloucestershire now, just up the road.
Oh, okay.
But in Bristol itself, you've got a whole history of hideous stuff going on, really. I mean, first of all, the sending of John Cabot over around about 1500, who got to Newfoundland and did the original surveys of North America. Around about the same time as Columbus and Vespucci, a bit later, were doing South America and the Caribbean from Spain.
Right.
But it's really significant. What people miss here is that it was Boston and it was New York that became the center of prosperity, the center of trade. That was no accident. That's because the English were more powerful than the Spanish, actually, in developing America. And there's a bit of dispute, of course, where America got its name. I think it might have been Amerigo Vespucci, but he did apparently change his name. You don't know if you know much about this, but there was another guy called Richard Amerique who financed the Cabot trip. He was from Ross-on-Wye, in just over the border, just into, I think it's in Herefordshire or Gloucestershire, on the Welsh borders. And he was one of the people that financed the Cabot trip. Yeah. So that was the original, which led to whatever it was. I think something like 25 million Native Americans being slaughtered, George, as part of that little exploit. And then a few years later, there was another little ruse they found, which was the slave trade. And another.
Bristol was a center of that.
12 million or so.
Yeah.
12 million or so human beings rounded up, nearly killed in Africa before they even made it to the voyage across. And of course, this was all kept at a distance. It was all done in secrecy.
Right.
From Bristol, you see, so the ships would go from Bristol out and do their dirty work and then come back, and no one would be any the wiser. The slave and all the nasty stuff was kept well away. And so Bristol was a really important centre for that, and I think in a way it still is, because the merchant venturers who were the slave traders, they made so much of their money, and they controlled the port in Bristol, and they made the money for every ship that came in and out. There's still an organisation which is still in existence, and they are still. We've done a little bit of work onto this year, George, and I interviewed the master of the merchant venturers on one of my shows. If your listeners want to check that one out. He's now one of the directors of Bristol Water, amongst many other things. So he's one of the people who's making money out of this privatised water. Every time we need a drink, he gets a cut, basically.
Oh, my gosh.
So this is what they've done.
Yeah.
What they've done is the slave traders are now owning much of the industry, the basic infrastructure that Thatcher began the privatisation of. And I'm not saying that the Labour Party...
Public-private partnerships,
yeah. So they are now owning the things we need, the infrastructure we need to live on, the things like the trains, this kind of thing.
Right.
They're running these things. And so they're starting to get a little bit close to home with the people that they're enslaving. And I sense a bit of a pushback actually in Bristol itself, in Bristol City itself. Particularly amongst the Afro-Caribbean community. We've got a very big Afro-Caribbean community and a very conscious Afro-Caribbean community in Bristol who are not happy with this. The other thing they were doing, George, just for your interest, is the carnival that we have every year in Bristol, the Afro-Caribbean Carnival, St Paul's Carnival it's called.
Okay.
There is attempts by the mayor of Bristol, who's himself a former merchant venturer. Guess, isn't that amazing? Another slave trader. He is trying to we have actually pulled the funding from the St Paul's Carnival, and he's trying to give it to a bunch of people who are much more commercially minded. Now, there's going to be a backlash against that. Absolutely, well, it's already started, because the community understand exactly what's going on. They're not stupid, and so if you want to have some kind of manufactured carnival, I think the locals are going to be happy with it.
We've got about a minute and a half left, Tony.
So this is really going back to the history.
It is. Bristol isn't it? Right. A very, very powerful place. We've got about a minute and a half. Tony, you have any closing comments?
Yeah, well, Bristol is a melting pot, and it's been a fascinating place. We've got all sorts of people from all over the world there, which has made it a fantastic, brilliant place to live. I think probably the most important discovery that we've made over the last few years to do with all this is Bristol's merchant venturers. These are the people that own these big companies nowadays. They've got massive investments. They're not open to transparency because they are formulated under a royal charter, would you believe? So they don't have to declare any of their accounts at Companies House publicly, so nobody knows how much wealth they own or where it goes or where it's come from. But the key thing for me was understanding the way that they give the terminology to their officers, the chief people in the merchant venturers. You've got the master, first of all, which of course you get a master of a lodge, you get a grand master of masonry in the city, and the person who's going to be master next year is called the senior warden. Again, a Masonic.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The senior warden and the junior warden is going to be the master in 2 years' time. And these are the guys who enforce the secrecy laws of the Masonic Lodge and of the merchant venturers. So I just think it's pretty obvious to me that what you've got there is you've got a Masonic outfit. I mean, they're taking all their cues from the Freemasonic Lodge, which of course is just a mirror of the triads, a mirror of witchcraft. Exactly the same oaths, very, very similar oaths are used in all these kinds of occult organisations, and effectively what they're becoming is criminal fraternity. So if we're looking back through the years and saying, well, actually this Freemasonry in Britain was Christian, in America was Christian, you can see at its root it's not, and those that are decent people that have been masters of lodges in the past are now being replaced with criminals.
Right. Well, Tony, thank you very much for being with us. We certainly appreciate all your fine insights, okay? Oh, okay.
George, lovely, and hope to
we'll
see you
do
again
it. Good
soon.
night. Good night, Tony. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Hello.
Good night.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Is that all right, George?
Okay.